Hello, folks. I am happy. I am 50 years old, and the wilderness has been my home for a long time. My closest friends are the animals out here. In nature, I have learned that the wildest storms often bring the brightest mornings. The story I'm about to tell you is just like that, but it happens in the concrete jungle of Seattle. It is about a tired young man named Wilder, a lost girl in the rain, and how one act of kindness changed his entire life. Where are you listening to this story from? Please let me know in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. It was a classic Seattle Friday night, the kind of evening where the sky didn't just rain. It wept a slow, persistent drizzle that turned the city streets into a blurry canvas of smeared neon and reflecting puddles. The damp chill seeped right through the soles of my shoes as I sat inside the Rusty Anchor, a dimly lit, subterranean jazz bar tucked away in the Pioneer Square district. The air in here was thick with the scent of aged bourbon, stale, damp wool, and the low, mournful wail of a saxophone coming from the small stage in the corner. My name is Wilder. I'm 28, and for the last 3 years, I've been grinding my soul into dust as a senior copywriter at Sterling Media, one of the most ruthless advertising agencies in the Pacific Northwest. I'm a tall guy, usually carrying a slight slouch from too many hours hunched over a backlit keyboard, with dark hair that hasn't seen a comb since Tuesday, and tired brown eyes that constantly look like they need a solid 10 hours of sleep. I used to be an optimist. I used to think hard work and raw creativity were the golden tickets to success. Now, I know they are just the things that make you an easy target for people who know how to play the corporate game. People like Marcus. I took a slow sip of my lukewarm craft IPA, staring at the scattered papers on my small, sticky wooden table. Marcus is my direct manager. He's in his early 40s, a man who wears suits that cost more than my car and keeps his silver-flecked hair slicked back so tightly it looks like a helmet. To the executives, he's a charismatic visionary, a guy who knows how to talk a big game over a round of golf. But to anyone working under him, he is a parasitic tyrant. 5 years ago, Marcus spearheaded a massive tech campaign that flopped so spectacularly it almost got him fired. Since then, he hasn't had a single original idea. His survival mechanism is simple: crush the creativity out of his subordinates, steal their best concepts, and present them as his own. If an idea is too risky, he kills it to protect his comfortable status quo. That was exactly what happened at 3 p.m. today. We were pitching the new campaign for Lumina Cosmetics. I had spent 3 weeks developing a concept that treated makeup not as a tool to hide flaws, but as a form of everyday magic, empowering, bold, and unapologetic. Marcus took one look at my storyboards, laughed a dry, hollow laugh, and threw a big red X across them. He replaced my pitch with a sterile, mathematically safe concept, focusing on anti-aging peptides and dermatological statistics. It was lifeless. It was boring. It was exactly the kind of mediocre garbage he felt safe presenting to the CEO on Monday. So, instead of going home to rest, I was here at the Rusty Anchor. I had my Lumina documents spread out, my pen flying across the margins as I desperately tried to figure out a way to salvage the campaign, to find a backdoor way to pitch the magic concept without getting myself fired. Sitting on the edge of my table was Barnaby, the bar's resident mascot. He is a fat 12-year-old tabby cat, missing half of his left ear, a battle scar from his younger, wilder alley days. Barnaby is generally distrustful of humanity, preferring to glare at patrons with his one good amber eye, but he tolerates me because I occasionally let him use my coat as a bed. I was just starting to crack a new angle for the tagline when the chaos hit. It didn't happen in slow motion. It was sudden, loud, and incredibly disruptive. A girl tripped over the leg of my chair, lost her balance completely, and crashed chest first onto my table. "Oops, sorry, brother," a voice slurred, followed by a sudden, breathy giggle. I scrambled to pull my documents out of the way, but it was too late. My glass of IPA tipped over, sending a golden wave of beer directly over my Lumina storyboards. I closed my eyes, letting out a heavy sigh, and looked up at the human disaster that had just ruined my night's work. Her name, as I would soon find out, was Harper. She was probably around 25, wearing an oversized, distressed, vintage leather jacket that looked like it belonged to an 80s rock star, layered over a shimmering, chaotic sequin dress. Her hair was a striking, unruly mop of bright crimson red, currently plastered to her forehead with a mix of rain and sweat. She had the kind of sharp, striking features that could have been intimidating if her eyes weren't entirely unfocused, swimming in a hazy sea of alcohol. Despite the mess she was in, there was an undeniable, magnetic energy radiating off her, a rebellious, untamed spark that felt completely alien in this quiet jazz bar. She pushed herself off my table, swaying dangerously. I stood up quickly, catching her by the elbow before she could faceplant onto the sticky wooden floorboards. "Whoa there," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Are you okay?" "I'm Harper," she announced to no one in particular, her words blending together. She patted the pockets of her oversized jacket, a look of profound confusion washing over her face. "My friends, they're gone, just vanished into thin air. Or maybe the aliens abducted them." "Aliens?" I repeated flatly. "Yeah," she nodded vigorously, stumbling a step forward. "And they stole my phone, and my wallet. They took my GPS coordinates, man. I'm completely off the grid." I looked around the bar. A few patrons were staring, but most just turned back to their drinks. Old Joe, the bartender, a massive bald man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and a permanent scowl shaped by years of breaking up bar fights, shot me a look that clearly said, "Get her out of here before she breaks something." "Do you have anyone I can call?" I asked, trying to dab at my ruined storyboards with a flimsy cocktail napkin. "A roommate? A cab?" Harper shook her head, leaning heavily against my shoulder. "Phone's dead. Aliens took the charger too." I sighed again, a deep, tired sound that echoed in my chest. I could have just handed her over to old Joe. I could have walked away and let someone else deal with it. It would have been the smart, boundaries-respecting thing to do. But my mother, who passed away when I was 19, had raised me with a fatal flaw, an overactive sense of responsibility. She always used to say, "Wilder, you don't walk away from someone standing in the rain, even if they forgot their own umbrella." Harper was practically standing in a hurricane. She could barely keep her eyes open, her sequined dress catching the dim light as she swayed. Leaving a heavily intoxicated girl alone in the middle of downtown Seattle at 2 in the morning wasn't an option. I knew the kind of predators that lurked around Pioneer Square after last call. "All right, Harper," I said, hastily shoving my beer-soaked Lumina papers into my leather messenger bag. "Do you at least remember where you live?" She squinted, tilting her head as if trying to decipher a complex mathematical equation. "Water? There's water and a big gate. Mercer Island? Kirkland?" I prompted. "The island one," she mumbled, giggling again, as she nearly tripped over her own heavy combat boots. "Okay, come on." I kept my grip on her arm, gently but firmly guiding her toward the exit. Barnaby the cat gave me a judgmental meow as we passed, clearly disapproving of my life choices. The cold Seattle rain hit us the moment we pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Rusty Anchor. I wrapped my own arm a little tighter around her shoulders to keep her steady as we navigated the slick, uneven brick sidewalks. My car, a faded silver Toyota Prius that had seen better days and had a passenger door that only opened if you pulled the handle twice, was parked 2 blocks away. It took us 10 minutes to make the short walk. By the time I finally got the tricky passenger door open and folded her into the seat, I was soaked to the bone, my mind still racing with the ruined Lumina campaign. I buckled her in, shut the door, and walked around to the driver's side. I slid behind the wheel, the smell of damp leather, stale beer, and Harper's heavy floral perfume filling the small cabin of the Prius. I put the key in the ignition, listening to the hybrid engine hum to life. At that moment, I thought this was just an annoying detour, a brief, chaotic interruption in my miserable corporate life. I had no idea that pulling out of that parking spot was about to alter the trajectory of my entire existence. Chapter 2. The stormy ride to Mercer Island. The drive out of downtown Seattle toward the I-90 floating bridge was an exercise in pure, unadulterated endurance. The relentless rain hammered against the windshield of my aging Prius, the wipers working frantically in a rhythmic, squeaking tempo that did little to clear the smudged glare of oncoming headlights. Beside me, Harper had slumped against the passenger window, her bright crimson hair leaving a damp smudge on the glass. The heavy scent of her floral perfume now violently clashed with the sharp, acidic tang of beer and wet leather. For a few glorious, peaceful minutes, the only sounds in the car were the hum of the hybrid engine and the drumming of the storm. I took a deep breath, trying to mentally reorganize the chaotic puzzle pieces of the Lumina campaign in my head. I just needed quiet. Of course, the universe had a sick sense of humor. Without warning, Harper shot up from her slumped position like a reanimated corpse. Her eyes, still glassy and entirely unfocused, widened as she stared at the glowing digital dashboard. Before I could stop her, her hands darted out, violently twisting the volume knob of the radio all the way to the right. The sudden, deafening blast of distorted guitar chords practically blew the speakers out of my doors. It was the unmistakable, raw opening of Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit, broadcasted by Grit Throat Gary, a legendary local late-night DJ. Gary was a notorious Seattle fixture, a 60-year-old chain-smoking veteran of the grunge era, who possessed a voice like grinding gravel and vehemently refused to play any track released after the year 1999. His show was usually a comforting background noise for my late-night writing sessions, but right now, at maximum volume, it felt like an auditory assault. Harper didn't just listen, she participated. Throwing her head back, she began screaming the lyrics, missing every single note with a level of confidence that was almost inspiring. She thrashed her hands around, her heavy sequin dress clinking against the seatbelt buckle, completely lost in her own personal mosh pit. "Turn it down!" I yelled over the noise, keeping one hand on the steering wheel while I reached for the radio. She slapped my hand away with surprisingly accurate reflexes, laughing maniacally. "You don't mute, Kurt, brother. It's illegal in Washington state," she roared, launching into the chorus with a devastatingly off-key shriek. I surrendered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white as we merged onto the bridge, the dark, churning waters of Lake Washington surrounding us. The cold draft seeping through the old car doors seemed to sober her up just a fraction enough for her to realize she was hungry. As we idled at a flashing red light near the island exit, Harper began furiously digging into the cavernous pockets of her distressed leather jacket. "Ah, I knew I saved you," she muttered triumphantly. She pulled out a foil-wrapped package that looked like it had been run over by a small tractor. Peeling back the aluminum, she revealed a heavily squished Seattle-style hot dog. It was a chaotic mess of a midnight snack, smothered in a thick layer of cream cheese, grilled onions, and jalapenos. "You gotta try this," she said, shoving the mangled meat tube dangerously close to my face. "I got it from Crazy Dave. Do you know Dave? 6'4", braided beard, wears a neon yellow beanie in the dead of summer. Nicest guy ever. Lost his left pinky in a freak barbecue tong accident, but the man makes a mean glizzy. Come on, take a bite. Cream cheese and onions, man." The breakfast of champions. The overpowering smell of grilled onions and warm dairy in the confined space of the car made my stomach churn. "No thank you, Harper. Please just hold on to that and, whatever you do, do not drop it on my upholstery. This car is barely holding its resale value as it is." She shrugged, taking a massive, unbothered bite, completely ignoring a dollop of cream cheese that landed on her chin. Chewing loudly, her gaze drifted out the window toward the shadowy silhouettes of the docks in the distance. Her chewing slowed, and her expression suddenly turned deadly serious. "You see them?" she whispered, pointing a greasy finger at the dark sky. "The seagulls. They're sleeping now, charging." I sighed, keeping my eyes glued to the slick road. "Charging? Like, resting?" She scoffed, a mixture of pity and disbelief on her face. "No, charging. Like batteries. You think birds are real? Especially seagulls? Brother, they are government drones. Look at them. They hover over the docks, recording our license plates, analyzing our garbage to see what we're consuming. Have you ever seen a baby seagull? No, because they are assembled in an underground facility in Nevada." She took another bite of her hot dog, nodding sagely at her own brilliance. I didn't even try to argue. I just let her ramble about the aerodynamic flaws of pigeon surveillance, while I navigated the winding, tree-lined suburban roads of Mercer Island. The massive, opulent colonial houses and perfectly manicured lawns looked ghostly in the rain, entirely removed from the gritty downtown reality I was used to. As we neared the upscale residential sector, Harper finally finished her hot dog and tossed the crumpled foil onto the floorboard. Seeking a new distraction, she reached toward the dashboard, where I had hastily tossed my damp, beer-stained Lumina storyboards. "Don't touch those," I warned instinctively, but it was too late. She had already pulled the papers into her lap, squinting at the dense, clinical paragraphs Marcus had forced me to write. The dim streetlights passing by illuminated the text. Cellular regeneration, dermatological statistics, age-defying peptide matrices. She read it in silence for a solid minute. Then, she let out a loud, genuine snort of derision. "Who wrote this garbage?" she asked, tossing the papers back onto the dash. It reads like an instruction manual for a colonoscopy. I clenched my jaw, the sting of truth hitting me hard. It's a cosmetics campaign. It has to sound scientific. Women want to know it works. Harper rolled her eyes, leaning back and crossing her arms. Women want to feel invincible, dummy. Why are you selling cosmetics like it's a prescription medicine? Cosmetics are magic. You put on a red lip, and suddenly you can fire your boss, key your ex's car, and conquer the world. It's war paint. It's an illusion. It's magic. I hit the brakes a little too hard at a stop sign. The car jerked, but I didn't notice. The words echoed in the small, damp space. Cosmetics are magic. It was so simple, so incredibly obvious. That was the missing link. Marcus had been trying to sell fear, the fear of aging, the fear of imperfections. But Harper, in her drunken, hot-dog-fueled wisdom, had just handed me the key to the entire campaign. We shouldn't be selling the cure. We should be selling the armor, the transformation, the magic. A spark ignited in my exhausted brain, ideas suddenly flowing together in a beautiful, coherent stream. I looked over at her, my annoyance completely vaporizing into profound gratitude. She was already half asleep again, her head bobbing against the seatbelt. Following her slurred, vague directions, the car slowly rolled to a stop in front of a massive, wrought iron gate guarding a colossal, waterfront estate. The exterior lights were blazing, casting a warm glow over the perfectly trimmed hedges. I threw the car into park, my heart pounding with a strange mix of creative adrenaline and anxiety. We had arrived, and the real nightmare was just about to begin. Chapter 3: Facing the Ice Queen. The sheer iron gates of the estate loomed before us like the entrance to a fortress, glistening under the relentless Seattle rain. I rolled my window down, letting the freezing downpour soak my sleeve, and pressed the call button on the glowing security keypad. A low buzz echoed, and the massive gates slowly swung inward, granting my beat-up Toyota Prius access to a world where it glaringly did not belong. The driveway was a winding path of crushed black gravel, flanked by perfectly manicured rhododendron bushes that looked expensive even in the pitch dark. At the end of the sweeping drive sat a colossal, modernist waterfront mansion, its sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows bathed in the warm, golden glow of security lights. I parked near the grandstone steps, cut the engine, and took a deep, bracing breath. The hardest part of the night was supposed to be over. I just had to drop her off and go home. I was painfully naive. I hurried around the car, the rain plastering my messy hair to my forehead, and yanked the passenger door open. Harper was practically dead weight, her oversized leather jacket sliding off her shoulder as I carefully hoisted her out. "Come on, Harper, you're home." "No government seagulls here," I coaxed, trying to keep her steady on her treacherous combat boots. She hummed a discordant tune, leaning almost her entire body weight against my side. We trudged up the wide stone steps, like two soldiers returning from a particularly humiliating battle. I reached out a trembling, freezing finger to press the doorbell, but before I could make contact, the heavy oak double doors swung open with a silent, heavy grace. The bright, white light of the grand foyer spilled out onto the porch, temporarily blinding me. When my vision finally adjusted, my heart stopped entirely, plummeting straight into the damp soles of my shoes. Standing in the doorway was not a tired, concerned suburban mother in a bathrobe. It was Victoria Sterling. To say Victoria Sterling was an intimidating figure would be a gross understatement. She was a woman who didn't just enter a room, she commanded its atmospheric pressure. She was the supreme CEO and reigning matriarch of Sterling Media. Currently in her late 50s, Victoria was strikingly tall, impeccably posture-perfect, and possessed a gaze so piercing and icy blue it could freeze boiling water. She wore a dark, midnight blue silk robe that draped flawlessly over her frame, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She had built the agency into an empire after her late husband left it in a precarious state 2 decades ago, forging her legendary steel demeanor in boardrooms full of aggressive, doubting men who thought she would fail. The industry called her the Ice Queen, and looking at her now, her expression devoid of any maternal warmth or panic, I fully understood why. Standing dutifully beside her was Brutus, an 8-year-old Harlequin Great Dane. Brutus was the size of a small horse, with a coat of stark black and white patches, but unlike his fierce owner, he possessed the sleepy, indifferent personality of an old man whose nap had been rudely interrupted. He let out a low, lazy huff, resting his massive head against Victoria's leg. "Mom!" Harper cheered, her voice slicing through the thick, terrifying silence. She suddenly pushed away from me, stumbling forward like a newborn fawn on ice, and practically crashed into the CEO of my company. "This is my new brother. He's super nice. He didn't even eat my hot dog, and he drove away from the aliens." Victoria caught her daughter effortlessly, her expression flickering with a microscopic fraction of maternal concern before instantly freezing over again. "Harper, you smell like a brewery and cheap onions," Victoria murmured, her voice a low, terrifyingly calm velvet. She adjusted her grip on her daughter, and that was when her eyes slowly lifted from Harper and locked onto me. The temperature on the porch seemed to drop another 10 degrees. My mind raced, connecting the dots I should have connected an hour ago. Harper Sterling. I had just spent the last hour driving the boss's daughter around, letting her eat garbage in my car, and ranting about my workplace. Miss Sterling," I stammered, feeling cold sweat mix with the rain on the back of my neck. I'm Wilder, from copywriting. I saw Harper at the bar. She lost her phone and wallet, and I just wanted to make sure she got home safely." Victoria didn't say a word at first. Her sharp, calculating eyes scanned me from head to toe, taking in my drenched clothes, my exhausted posture, and the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from my face. As she adjusted Harper's jacket to keep her from falling, Victoria's gaze suddenly caught on something else. Clutched tightly in Harper's left hand, crumpled and slightly stained with beer, were my Lumina Cosmetics storyboards. Harper had refused to let go of them when getting out of the car. Victoria delicately pried the papers from her daughter's grip. For a seasoned advertising veteran like Victoria, it only took a 3-second glance to process the visual information. Her eyes darted over the bold, chaotic sketches, the fiery red lipstick concepts, and the sharp, hastily scribbled word in the margin, magic. A profound, silent shift occurred behind Victoria's icy exterior. Just that Friday afternoon, she had reviewed the pre-read deck submitted by Marcus, my manager, for the Monday pitch. Marcus's presentation had been a sterile, mind-numbing collection of clinical data, pie charts, and anti-aging pseudoscience. It had bored her to tears. But these sketches in her hand, they were raw, they were bold, they felt like a revolution. And they looked absolutely nothing like the corporate slop Marcus had claimed his team was working on. The sharp instincts that had made her a billionaire flared to life. A heavy seed of suspicion regarding Marcus's integrity and competence took root in her mind as she realized the true creative force in her department might be the soaked, terrified young man standing on her porch. However, she gave absolutely none of this away. Victoria neatly folded the sketches and slipped them into the pocket of her silk robe, her face a mask of absolute neutrality. She looked back up at me, her piercing blue eyes pinning me in place. "Thank you, Wilder," she said, her tone perfectly even, devoid of any gratitude, but lacking immediate hostility, which was the best I could hope for. "It was very responsible of you. Drive home safely." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Have a good night." I turned around, ready to sprint back to the safety of my broken-down Prius and flee the island forever. But as I took my first step down the stairs, her voice cut through the sound of the rain, freezing me mid-stride. "And Wilder?" she called out, the corner of her lip twitching upward into a millimeter of a smirk. "I sincerely hope your project pitch on Monday morning is put together far better than the way you manage your weekend time. Good night." The heavy oak doors clicked shut with a resounding, definitive thud. I stood frozen on the porch for a long moment, the rain soaking through my jacket, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't know whether to vomit from the stress or laugh at the sheer absurdity of the universe. Taking a deep breath of the freezing air, a strange, nervous chuckle finally escaped my lips. Monday was going to be an absolute bloodbath. Chapter 4. Office Storms and the Reluctant Savior. Monday morning at 8 a.m., Sterling Media occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek, intimidating downtown Seattle skyscraper, serving as a temple of glass, polished concrete, and suffocating corporate ambition. I walked into the bullpen feeling like a man marching toward his own execution. My weekend had consisted of precisely 0 hours of sleep, fueled entirely by black coffee, cold dread, and the lingering terror of my porch encounter with Victoria Sterling. Sitting at the desk adjacent to mine was Benji, our 23-year-old junior graphic designer. Benji is a chronically anxious kid who looks like he's about 12 years old, characterized by his messy mop of curly blonde hair, thick-rimmed glasses that constantly slide down his nose, and a wardrobe consisting entirely of oversized wool cardigans that he uses to hide his nervous sweating. Before he started working here 6 months ago, he was a bright-eyed, optimistic art school graduate. Now, thanks to the toxic management style of our boss, he physically flinches every time a desk phone rings. "He's in a mood today," Benji whispered, not daring to look up from his digital drawing tablet, his voice trembling slightly. He already yelled at me because the kerning on the Lumina Cosmetics logo wasn't clinical enough. I don't even know what clinical kerning looks like, Wilder. I patted Benji's shoulder sympathetically, just as the sharp, authoritative voice of our manager pierced the low, tense hum of the office. "Wilder, my office, now." Marcus's office was a transparent glass box, specifically designed to make everyone outside feel inferior and everyone inside feel heavily scrutinized. He was standing behind his massive imported mahogany desk, wearing a charcoal pinstripe suit that screamed aggressive mediocrity. "Have a seat," he commanded, though he didn't bother waiting for me to actually do so. He tapped a perfectly manicured finger against a thick stack of glossy printed presentation decks. "The Lumina pitch is finalized. We are moving forward exclusively with the dermatological data approach. The client wants to feel secure, Wilder, not entertained. I've personally refined the copy you submitted on Friday, completely removing all that nonsensical, poetic fluff you wrote about empowerment and magic. This is a high-stakes cosmetics pitch, not a children's fantasy novel." He reached into his drawer and slid a small, black, designated presentation clicker across the glass desk toward me. It stopped inches from my hand like a weapon. "At 2 p.m. today, when Victoria and the Lumina executives are seated in the main boardroom, you will stand quietly by the projector. You will advance the slides precisely when I cue you. You will not speak. You will not improvise. You are just the technical support for my vision. Am I understood?" I stared down at the small plastic remote. It was the ultimate corporate leash, a physical symbol of my complete subjugation. A sudden surge of hot, bitter anger flared in my chest, but I swallowed it down, burying my pride as I gave him a tight, mechanical nod. "Understood, Marcus." I returned to my desk a few minutes later, staring blankly at my sleeping computer monitor, the crushing weight of 1,000 compromised creative visions pressing heavily down on my shoulders. I was just debating whether quitting the advertising industry to become a reclusive goat farmer in the mountains was a viable career path, when a sudden, disruptive energy entirely shifted the atmosphere of the bullpen. Heads turned. Keyboards ceased their clacking. Striding purposefully through the drab labyrinth of gray cubicles was a vision of effortless, intimidating cool. It was Harper. Stripped of the rainy night chaos and the haze of alcohol, she looked completely different, yet equally striking. She was wearing a beautifully tailored, high-fashion, houndstooth blazer over a faded vintage Ramones t-shirt, paired with black skinny jeans and heavy leather combat boots that clacked authoritatively against the polished concrete floor. Her fiery red hair was no longer a wet, tangled mop. It was styled into sleek, sharp waves that perfectly framed her striking face. She looked fiercely independent, artistic, and completely alien in our sterile corporate environment. Draped over her left arm was my faded brown jacket, looking clean, dry, and carefully folded. She quickly spotted me, ignored the staring copywriters, and marched right over, dropping the jacket unceremoniously onto my keyboard. "You left this in your sad, incredibly slow little hybrid car," she said, her voice bright, sharp, and completely devoid of the drunken slurs from Friday night. I blinked, quickly standing up and glancing around nervously. "Harper, what are you doing here?" She smirked, leaning casually against the drab fabric of my cubicle partition. "Returning your property. And maybe officially apologizing for subjecting you to grit-throat Gary at maximum volume while trying to feed you a mashed hot dog. My head still hurts from the hangover." Before I could shush her and explain the precarious nature of my employment, Marcus stepped out of his glass office, holding a ceramic mug of artisan coffee. He glared fiercely in our direction. "Wilder, this floor is not a social club for your hipster friends. If she doesn't have a registered visitor's badge, she needs to leave the premises immediately," Marcus barked, sizing Harper up with thinly veiled disdain. Harper slowly turned her head, her sharp eyes scanning Marcus from his excessively gelled hair down to his polished Italian loafers. "Is that the guy?" she asked me in a low, conspiratorial whisper. "The one who wants to sell expensive makeup like it's a clinical prostate exam?" I nodded grimly, feeling my stomach twist. Harper's eyes widened slightly, in sudden realization, as she looked from Marcus, up to the massive Sterling Media logo glowing on the wall, and then back to me. A wicked, highly amused smile slowly spread across her lips. Wait, you work for the Ice Queen? You're actually one of my mother's corporate drones? I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Yes, and he's the guy who is going to present that medical garbage to her at 2 p.m. while I am forced to stand in the corner like a glorified lamp. Harper didn't laugh. Instead, her gaze hardened into something fiercely protective. As an independent freelance video editor and animator, she harbored a deep, fundamental hatred for corporate suits who stifled genuine artistic expression. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer, pulling out a sleek, custom metallic USB drive attached to a neon pink lanyard. With a swift, remarkably stealthy motion, she slid it directly under my keyboard, where Marcus couldn't see it. I couldn't sleep on Sunday, she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell her expensive, sharp perfume. I kept thinking about what you said in the car, about the magic of transformation. I had my editing rig already set up, so I pulled an all-nighter. Consider it a formal thank you for not leaving me to be abducted by the government seagulls. She patted my shoulder, gave a sarcastic, exaggerated military salute to a heavily fuming Marcus, and casually strolled out of the bullpen, leaving a trail of baffled advertising executives in her wake. I sat back down, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Checking to make sure Marcus had retreated safely into his glass box, I pulled the metallic drive out and plugged it directly into my workstation. I opened the single media file stored on the drive. It was a 90-second animated video. I hit play, and my breath instantly caught in my throat. It was nothing short of brilliant. Using dynamic, kinetic typography and stunning, vivid color palettes, Harper had brought my exact, original vision to life. The animation transitioned flawlessly from a drab, monochromatic, scientific world into a vibrant, explosive, unapologetic universe. The absolute second a makeup brush touched a canvas. It was edgy, it was highly emotional, and it was undeniably magical. Tucked neatly underneath the USB drive was a small, neon pink sticky note covered in jagged, hurried handwriting. It read, "Don't let that ridiculous suit guy steal your stage." I stared at the glowing screen, then looked down at the black plastic clicker Marcus had given me. The suffocating fear that had paralyzed me all weekend suddenly evaporated, instantly replaced by a dangerous, electrifying resolve. I wasn't just going to click the slides this afternoon. I was going to burn Marcus's entire presentation to the ground. Chapter 5. The Comeback in the Glass Boardroom. At precisely 1:55 p.m., the atmosphere inside the main executive boardroom was suffocatingly tense. The room was a massive, soundproof glass box suspended over the Seattle skyline, featuring a sprawling, polished marble table that reflected the gray clouds outside. I stood rigidly in the corner near the high-end projector, my hand sweating around the small black plastic clicker, while my other hand was buried deep in my pocket, tightly clutching the metallic USB drive attached to the neon pink lanyard. Marcus was pacing at the head of the table, adjusting his expensive silk tie and radiating an unearned, slick confidence. Across the table sat the delegation from Lumina Cosmetics, led by their chief marketing officer, Evelyn Vance. Evelyn was a woman in her late 40s who commanded attention without saying a word. Dressed in a pristine, tailored white pantsuit with a signature, razor-sharp application of deep crimson lipstick, she was notorious in the beauty industry for being ruthlessly demanding and painfully difficult to impress. She had a reputation for firing marketing agencies mid-pitch if she felt her time was being wasted. Sitting next to her were two junior executives who looked perpetually terrified of breathing too loudly. Exactly at 2 p.m., the heavy glass door swung open, and Victoria Sterling entered. The Ice Queen glided into the room, her presence immediately lowering the temperature. She took her seat at the head of the table opposite Marcus, her icy blue eyes flicking briefly toward me before settling on her manager. "Let's begin, Marcus. Lumina is looking for a revolution, not a reiteration," Victoria stated, her voice smooth but laced with a lethal underlying warning. Marcus offered a practiced, gleaming smile. "Absolutely, Victoria, Evelyn. Today, Sterling Media is thrilled to present the future of skincare and cosmetics." He snapped his fingers, signaling me to click to the first slide. A sterile, blue and white graphic filled the screen, displaying complex molecular structures. We call it the cellular regeneration matrix. Our market research dictates that today's consumer is deeply concerned with the science of aging. We want to position Lumina not just as makeup, but as a dermatological necessity. Look at these statistics. For the next 15 minutes, Marcus droned on. It was a spectacular, slow-motion train wreck. He threw around buzzwords like peptide resilience and epidermal fortification while reading directly from his notes. I watched from the corner as the energy completely drained from the room. Evelyn Vance's sharp eyes glazed over. She crossed her arms, a deep frown forming, and deliberately checked her diamond-encrusted wristwatch, the universal corporate signal for impending doom. One of the junior executives was struggling to suppress a yawn. Even worse, Victoria Sterling sat perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask, but her eyes were cold, calculating, and dangerously narrowed. She remembered the bold, vibrant sketches she had confiscated from her daughter on Friday night, and what Marcus was currently presenting was a lifeless, cowardly counterfeit. "Next slide, Wilder," Marcus commanded, his voice tight with barely concealed panic as he noticed Evelyn's souring expression. He desperately needed the data charts to back up his failing rhetoric. I looked at the black clicker in my hand. I looked at Marcus, who was subtly gesturing for me to hurry up. Then, I looked at Victoria, whose piercing gaze was suddenly locked onto me, almost as if she was waiting to see if I would simply roll over and play dead. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, and made my decision. I placed the black clicker down on the projector cart. The small clack of the plastic echoed loudly in the quiet, tense room. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Marcus blinked, his flawless corporate mask slipping to reveal pure, unadulterated rage. "Excuse me?" "Wilder, advance the slide immediately," he hissed through gritted teeth, taking a threatening step toward me. "I said no, Marcus," I replied, stepping out from the shadow of the corner and walking directly to the main console. "Because this data isn't a revolution, it's an autopsy. Lumina Cosmetics deserves better than a medical journal." Before Marcus could physically intervene, I pulled the neon pink lanyard from my pocket, shoved the USB drive into the console, and bypassed his entire presentation. The room's smart lighting automatically dimmed as the media file initiated. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus whispered furiously, but Evelyn Vance suddenly leaned forward, holding up a manicured hand to silence him. "Let the boy speak," Evelyn commanded, her eyes fixed on the screen. I stood at the head of the table, looking directly at the Lumina executives. "Women don't buy cosmetics because they are terrified of their own skin," I began, my voice gaining strength. "They don't want a prescription. They want armor. They want transformation. Cosmetics aren't medicine, Evelyn. Cosmetics are magic." The projector flared to life. Harper's 90-second animation hit the screen like a visual earthquake. It started in a drab, gray, clinically sterile world, a direct mockery of Marcus's concept, before a single brushstroke of crimson lipstick shattered the screen. Kinetic typography exploded in vibrant, unapologetic neon colors. The music was a thumping, rebellious, heartbeat-driven track. It showed women not as fragile patients fighting aging, but as fierce, empowered warriors putting on their war paint. It was chaotic, beautiful, and deeply emotional. The slogan flashed at the end in bold, hand-drawn letters. "Lumina, own your magic." When the video faded to black and the lights slowly raised, the boardroom was dead silent. I held my breath, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. Instead, Evelyn Vance let out a long, slow exhale. A genuine, radiant smile broke across her usually severe face. She began to clap, slowly at first, and then her junior executives enthusiastically joined in. "That," Evelyn said, her voice rich with satisfaction, "is exactly the revolution I was looking for. It's bold. It's dangerous. I love it." Marcus, desperately trying to salvage his career, quickly smoothed his tie and stepped forward with a hollow laugh. "Yes, well, as you can see, our creative team really pushed the boundaries under my direct supervision." "Stop talking, Marcus," Victoria Sterling cut in, her voice slicing through the air like a guillotine blade. She wasn't looking at him, she was staring at the frozen final frame of the animation. Beneath her icy exterior, a storm of realization was brewing. She recognized the kinetic transitions, the specific color grading, and the rebellious, punk rock energy of the video. It was undeniably Harper's distinct editing style. Her daughter had a hand in this. The pieces clicked rapidly in Victoria's brilliant mind. The boy on the porch in the rain, the confiscated sketches in Harper's hand, this sudden, defiant presentation, and Marcus's pathetic attempt to claim it. Marcus hadn't supervised this. He had actively tried to bury it. Looking at me standing there, breathless and defiant, Victoria felt a sudden, sharp pang of nostalgia. I reminded her entirely of herself 30 years ago, a hungry, desperate, creative fighting against a room full of arrogant suits who wanted to keep her silent. As Evelyn Vance and her team eagerly gathered their things, enthusiastically shaking my hand and demanding to see the full campaign roll out by next week, Victoria remained seated, her eyes never leaving Marcus, who had gone completely pale. Once the clients had happily exited the glass boardroom, the heavy silence returned. Victoria finally stood up, smoothing the front of her designer blazer. "Marcus, return to your desk and do not touch a single file on your computer," she ordered, her tone absolute zero. "Wilder, brilliant work. We will discuss your new title tomorrow morning." She turned and strode out of the boardroom without waiting for a response. As she walked down the pristine, carpeted hallway toward her corner office, Victoria pulled her sleek smartphone from her pocket and dialed a direct extension. "Helen," she said, addressing the head of human resources, "I need you to freeze Marcus's server access immediately. I want a full, comprehensive audit of every single creative project he has claimed credit for over the last 3 years. Do it now." Chapter 6. A Sweet Ending by Lake Washington. The HR audit took less than 48 hours to completely dismantle an entire career. Helen from Human Resources, a formidable woman in her early 60s with a sharp silver bob, wire-rimmed glasses, and a notorious reputation for excising corporate fraudsters with the cold, unfeeling precision of a surgeon, found a massive, undeniable trail of stolen concepts, falsified performance reports, and plagiarized pitches dating back 3 years. Marcus didn't even get the dignity of packing his own desk in private. Company security escorted him out by Wednesday afternoon, carrying a sad little cardboard box filled with his overpriced desk toys and framed motivational quotes. By Thursday morning, I was called back into the glass boardroom. Victoria Sterling didn't offer a dramatic, sweeping speech about justice. Instead, she simply slid a new, heavily revised contract across the polished marble table. I was officially promoted to creative lead, given a dedicated project budget, and put directly in charge of the Lumina Cosmetics campaign. For the first time in my professional life, the crushing, suffocating weight on my chest vanished, instantly replaced by the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of true creative freedom. With Marcus permanently out of the picture and my new position secured purely on my own merit, the invisible corporate barrier between Harper and me had effectively dissolved. I didn't waste any time waiting for the dust to settle. I called her that Friday afternoon, nervously asking if she wanted to grab a coffee, a real one, in the daylight, not a lukewarm craft beer at a dimly lit jazz bar. We met at an artisanal patisserie near Pike Place Market on a crisp, bright Saturday morning. Stripped of the chaotic, rainy night energy and the heavy sequin dress, Harper was even more captivating. She wore a simple, oversized vintage band sweater and faded jeans, her vibrant, crimson hair catching the morning sunlight, her sharp eyes sparkling with genuine warmth and mischief. We sat by a large glass window, sipping overpriced oat milk lattes and splitting a delicate, perfectly flaky almond croissant. "I have to admit," she said, lightly licking a crumb of powdered sugar from her thumb, "this is a significant, highly appreciated upgrade from Crazy Dave's squished cream cheese hot dog at 2 in the morning." I laughed, the sound coming easier and feeling lighter than it had in years. "And surprisingly, I haven't spotted a single government seagull drone since we sat down. They're recalibrating their surveillance sensors," she replied without missing a single beat, leaning across the small wooden table. We talked for hours, completely ignoring the bustling crowds outside the window. We didn't talk about advertising or corporate ladders. We talked about her profound passion for kinetic typography, my long-abandoned dream of writing a science fiction novel, and the strange, hilarious cosmic joke that had brought us together in the first place. By the time I walked her back to her independent editing studio, the easy banter had shifted into something undeniably deeper, a quiet, magnetic gravity pulling us effortlessly together. 6 months flew by in a rapid, exhausting blur of late-night editing sessions, high-stakes client meetings, and weekend getaways to the mountains. The Own Your Magic campaign for Lumina Cosmetics launched in late autumn and immediately caught fire. It went viral across multiple social media platforms, heavily praised by industry critics for its bold, unapologetic, and fiercely empowering message. Lumina's sales skyrocketed within the first quarter. Evelyn Vance sent me a rare, handwritten thank you note alongside an expensive bottle of scotch, and Sterling Media secured a lucrative multi-year retainer with the brand. It was a massive professional triumph that I could finally, truly claim as my own. But the real victory wasn't measured in market shares, glowing press releases, or substantial bonus checks. It was measured in the quiet, peaceful moments, like the one I found myself in on a crisp Sunday evening in November. I drove my trusty, still creaky Toyota Prius over the I-90 floating bridge, but this time, the sky was a clear, brilliant twilight purple, completely devoid of the suffocating, weeping rain. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate on Mercer Island. I didn't have to nervously roll down my window and press the intercom. The gates opened automatically, recognizing my car. I parked on the pristine black gravel driveway and walked up the grand stone steps with a light heart. I didn't have to stand shivering on the porch, waiting for the Ice Queen to scowl at me in the dead of night. Before I even reached the door, it swung open, and Brutus, the massive, lazy Harlequin Great Dane, trotted out to greet me with a slow, happy tail wag, heavily leaning his warm body against my leg. Harper appeared in the doorway right behind him, wearing a soft, emerald green dress, her fiery hair tied up in a loose, elegant knot. She smiled broadly, stepping out into the cool evening air to wrap her arms around my neck and press a warm, lingering kiss to my lips. "You made it," she whispered against my mouth. Inside, the modernist waterfront mansion felt entirely different. The severe, intimidating chill I remembered from that fateful Friday night was completely gone, beautifully replaced by the warm, flickering glow of a crackling fireplace and the rich, savory aroma of roasted rosemary chicken. We sat around a grand, polished dining table overlooking the dark, gently rippling waters of Lake Washington. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the table, but she wasn't wearing her heavy corporate armor. Dressed in a simple, elegant cashmere sweater, she looked genuinely relaxed. The deep lines of stress around her piercing blue eyes significantly softened. She reached for an expensive bottle of imported red wine and, to my absolute surprise, stood up to personally pour a generous measure into my crystal glass. She set the bottle down, her gaze meeting mine, the ghostly hint of her famous, terrifying smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "You know, Wilder," Victoria said, her voice smooth and laced with genuine, quiet affection. "I was reviewing the quarterly projections for Lumina today. Outstanding numbers." I nodded respectfully, taking a slow sip of the excellent wine. "Thank you, Victoria. It was a solid team effort." She waved a dismissive hand, settling gracefully back into her chair. "Modesty is boring. Let's not do that at the dinner table. What I mean to say is," she paused, looking fondly at her daughter and then back at me, "it's a very good thing you didn't leave her at that bar that night. And it is equally good that you defied your boss in the boardroom." Across the table, entirely hidden from Victoria's sharp eyes by the heavy linen tablecloth, I felt Harper's foot lightly nudge my shin. I looked over at her, and she flashed me a brilliant, conspiratorial wink. I smiled, raising my glass in a silent toast to the unpredictable, chaotic magic of the universe, finally realizing that sometimes the absolute best decisions you make are the ones that break all the rules. The story of Wilder and Harper reminds us that life is full of unexpected and our greatest blessings often come disguised as our biggest inconveniences. In our daily lives, we all face moments of deep exhaustion. We deal with unfair situations at work, heavy storms, and unexpected burdens that test our patience. It is always so easy to just walk away, to keep our heads down, and to accept things as they are. But sometimes, stepping out of our comfort zone to help a stranger in need, or finding the courage to speak the truth when everyone else is silent, is exactly what sets us on the path to our true destiny. Kindness and integrity are never wasted. Even when it feels like your hard work is being stolen or ignored by those in power, you must trust that the truth will always find its way to the light. A single act of responsibility or a single moment of bravery in a boardroom can completely turn your life around. You just have to believe in the magic of your own worth and refuse to let anyone dim your light. If this story touched your heart and brought a little warmth to your day, please take a moment to share this video with your friends and loved ones. We would love to hear your thoughts, So please leave a comment below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and uplifting stories. May God bless you and your family abundantly. May He grant you the courage to stand up for what is right, the strength to extend a helping hand to those who cross your path, and the faith to trust His perfect timing. If you believe that God can turn your most difficult and exhausting days into your greatest victories and bring the right people into your life exactly when you need them, please comment Amen down below.